Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast Beyond. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm good today. How are you, Tammy?
Doing very well. Doing very well. So, welcome everybody to the podcast Beyond, where we are hoping to take you on a journey, walking with us from unhappiness to happiness. And this is also a very personal journey because unhappiness is something I've known in my life. I don't know about you, Mark. Well, I
I
do know about
certainly
you,
have
actually.
known my share.
Yes. And of course, because Mark and I are brother and sister, we really know each other's journeys. And if this is a podcast about guidance and where to go for it. We're not necessarily we're saying that we're the guidance. We're more about teaching you how to find guidance in a world without a lot of guidance. And so we're always going to come back to the point of learning about inner guidance, mysterious, and inner critic, not so mysterious. Correct, guys? Okay. So that's the basic premise of the podcast is to discuss where to go and how to walk this journey that many people are in from sort of from a darker place to a brighter place. And that there's a lot of latitude in that. So, there's a lot of range in that
And
as
I have
as far
certainly,
as my world goes.
yeah, absolutely. I've certainly had my darker times. And some of that was, I think, just growing up is hard. And then other stuff, I think, is the things that I was taught as a kid. I don't think that a lot of the things that we're talking about were easily taught when I was a kid. And so my attitude at the time, like I wouldn't have said it. I don't think I would have believed it. But some of the things that I was taught, I then learned to perpetuate. And certain attitudes, if you keep perpetuating them, they will keep getting you the results. And if the result can be pain, the result can be alienation more and more.
Right. And that's part of why we're doing this. As a life coach, mine, we're going to talk about a little bit of our experience, but uh, you know, I did a lot of repeating of the same things over and over again because of the fact that I didn't really understand that this universe works in a certain way, reliably, all the time. And that was comforting to me as I learned it in my, later years. I didn't really learn that as a kid from our parents. And also that this earth works in a certain way. So it's like a universe and an earth inside of it, and then a person, a body with a spirit inside it. So it's like, I love, what are those, when the dolls that you take
Yes,
apart, and
The Russian stacking dolls. There's a word for them, and I don't know that word, but it's
so if anybody knows it, I'd like,
put them in comments.
yeah, I'd really like. So in this episode, and I think in all the episodes, we're sort of taking the idea of practical, like we have, you have developed sort of practical tactics, right? For how to cope with this world and how to, especially how to make great decisions. There are certain things, some of them, you coined the phrase when we were really young, Tammy isms, things that we lean on when we don't know what to do. There's practical and there's theoretical. Where does your belief system come from and how does that factor into having a happy life? Really? And then there's, I want to call it the miraculous. Sometimes I like to call it the magical, and you're going to see a lot of this. This is my magic wand. I mean, this is to bring lightness and levity to the idea that this whole place we live, the way sometimes we move from one place to the next isn't always the hustle and the grind. It can be very deep work you do on yourself, maybe in therapy before coaching or reading a lot of self-help books, whatever ways you're working on yourself, right? What you're working on yourself. We hope to be a little sliver of that for you guys and for ourselves. This is therapeutic for us, at least for me.
Yes, it is. Me
And
too.
yeah, and at the same time, there's something grander here. Call it what you will. I'm using the word universe because it's not a very triggering word. Some people like to use the word God. Some people like to use the word universe, the unified field, your moral compass, all these different versions of that's sort of how that we perceive what we're doing here. And it took us, this is episode 5, so it took us
Took us this
really.
long to string that out into a coherent sort of statement, but we've been talking about it a lot, off camera and said, the conversation of, so what is it exactly that we think we're doing here? What is it that we want to be doing here? What is it that, and so we've put this together, slowly,
Yeah,
slowly it's cohering, I think.
yeah, it is. And you know, when we're talking, obviously we've done a few episodes. Some we've gotten people asking some questions. I don't know about you, but we've had people asking questions,
Absolutely. Yes, I certainly have. Certainly have.
and the sort of the big question I get, I don't know if you get it, is where did this all begin? Like people notice our bond, and it's
Yes.
a story.
I think so
It's
too. Well, you've alluded to it. You said, when we were kids, we were close in the way kids were, like we played together and stuff, but then there was sort of a breakthrough when you were 12 and I was 13, where we kind of got real. And
yeah,
I feel like and that's always been my touchstone since then. No matter where we've lived far apart or in each other's lives a lot or not as much, I've always felt like I have this connection with you because of that.
right. And that's, like, so because it's a little indelicate, I'm going to tell this. I'll tell the story because it's like would be more uncomfortable for me, I guess,
It's a
than for
baby
you. Maybe it
story.
would be for you. It's a, yeah, it's a girly story. But it shows how one conversation can change the course of one's life. And I think that when you're a child, when you're young, like 12 and 13, is, you're still a kid and you don't know what you don't know. So we lived, we had a very difficult childhood in many ways, not and on the scale of difficulty, probably not as nearly as difficult as many people and much more difficult than other people. It was sort of psychologically difficult because we had a very, very smart, brilliant mother who was
Challenging,
very,
challenging, let's say. I would say she was a challenging
yes,
person, right? Yeah.
yeah, she was a brilliant woman who lived in a lot of pain. So put intelligence and pain together, and
And
that can be a
and
bad
and
brew.
was had enough to share. Let's put it that way. Her pain was up for sharing. And that's a hard place to be for her. It's a hard place to be when you love her and when you're like dependent as a kid is. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and just just you know to put it out there, like I think that the reason we can talk about a lot of this is that we've really done a lot of work on it. So we're not in on this particular topic. I may cry on this podcast so at some point, but I've worked through a lot of things with mom, and down the road there are some really amazing stories, miraculous stories, magical stories that are going to come that are, this can be a weapon too. Like this is joking with people.
If need be, keep it in your purse for those moments when, yeah, right.
Or, to, it keeps it, but the thing is that mom was a very difficult person. And without knowing it, this was a time, I call it the time before Oprah. Mom, we grew up in the time, and Oprah is such a touchstone for me of when we started talking as a nation, as a planet, about self-help on a regular basis. And I think people say, well, why Oprah? And I think we talked about this the other day. Well, there were many people that did that kind of a talk show, and I can't remember the names of 90% of them, but
That's true.
Oprah
I remember
endured.
there was Phil Donahue because he was kind of the first, and there was Sally Jesse Raphael, and she was one of the ones in the mix. And
I
then
think there was a Jenny Jones in there.
there was a Jenny Jones in there, but now no, it wasn't not Jenny
Was
Craig,
it that her name?
not Jennifer. No, no, Jennifer Jones. I
but
don't know.
but you see the point,
Right. We're
you know,
not, but
and
when you say Oprah, people are like, Oprah who? Nobody, I've never said Oprah and someone said Oprah who? Like Oprah
right. We
Smith?
remember when
No.
when the show was the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Right.
Now then it went to Oprah and was so. And there was also she was I think she was a very evolved version of what that show could be, and there's like great stories about how she evolved that show, and and that changed me. And there was also devolved versions of that show, like Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer was a
I
devolved
forgot.
version of that show. You're abs I never thought of it. I never thought of it like if you look at all of those shows on a continuum from Oprah at 10 to Jerry Springer at 0. And then they could all be fit like I never thought of it as a continuum before. That there's a line
I Yeah.
Jerry Springer to Oprah. Right.
Yeah, and so our story started. That's why I'm so interested in language, and I'm so interested in conversation and connection. This is also about the idea that sharing stories and sharing connection can be the thing that moves somebody. So we lived in a very large house, and sort of
I still live
had
there.
you do live in that house. It's a great place. But at the time it was very scary. It was a carriage house built in, I think, the 20s.
20s, you
And
wish. It was built at least in the 1880s. Yeah.
wow.
It's
Wow,
old.
learn something
It's old.
new.
Well over
Okay.
100 years at this point. Well over. Like pushing up 150 years at this point, that house. Yeah. It's still there.
Wow.
Come
Okay. So
visit.
it was a very scary old house. And we had each had our rooms, our bedrooms on the upper floor. And my parents, which is start to notice the unusual things, right, about our childhood. Most parents like to go to sleep on the same floor as their young children. Our parents were on their bedroom was on the bottom floor. And you didn't notice this until I told you. Our parents' room was low down here on the lower level, and I was the farthest room to the other side of the house as my parents could be from me. So guess who the pecking order of who the favorite child was. And this is not, I mean, I know you suffered, because also you can suffer because of being the favorite child, and
Yeah,
there's
you
many
could just
stories in
be the
that.
one that where the focus is, and that's like its own unique set of crises. And then you could be the one where the focus is not, and that, you know,
And that's the reason that I would say nothing is either good or bad. It's good, or it's on or off, good, right for you, wrong for you. Not there's no better thing. If I had the focus on me, like you have stories about how the focus on you caused a lot of pain. But let's get back to the story. So you were on your side of the house, and for some particular, for no particular reason on that particular day, you sort of wandered onto my side of the house and my room, and we were not close. We just were hello, passing each other. We didn't share a lot of friends. We're almost Irish twins, for God's sake. Like is that a thing? I don't know.
that's the
Um,
thing. That's the thing. If you're less than 12 months apart, we're like, what, 14, 15 months apart? Like 15 months
yeah,
apart. So
really close. We were close in age, but we weren't close in the way that we spent time together. And you came onto my side of the house, maybe to borrow something, a cup of sugar. Being, oh, excuse
yeah.
me. Um, I don't know, it's something. And we each had our own bathroom. So this, like, don't cry for us, Argentina. We weren't suffering financially, which is another thing. That came later for both of us.
Oh yeah, we did our share of suffering financially on our own as adults, and no question about
Right.
that. Right.
Yeah. So at the time, no, that wasn't a thing for us. So we both had our own bathroom, we both had our own rooms, and for some reason you came on to my side of the house, and you wandered into my bathroom, and you came out of my bathroom, and you asked me the most personal question that probably a 12 and a 13-year-old have ever asked each other. You were like, I saw maxi pads in your room. And I'm like, uh-huh. And now I'm 12. And I was like, uh-huh. And you were like, does that mean anything? And I remember the moment of like, why is my brother asking me this? And what does it mean if I say something? But the answer was like, no, I'm not there yet. It's just in case. Somebody in my world, I can't believe that was mom, but somebody in my world, because mom wouldn't necessarily think like that. Um, it arrived in my it arrived in my bathroom, and I said, no, I'm not quite there yet, but I guess it's for if it happens. And that was the first real question you ever asked me.
It kind of broke open a conversation about just like, like life and reality and sexuality and the whole, it's like it was a personal question. And, like, I don't know, when you're a little kid, it's like not like I mean, I'm not gonna say speak for anyone else, but as a little kid, I didn't have like a ton of secrets. I mean, it was like, but then all of a
Exactly.
sudden you get to a certain age and it's like you do have secrets. Or you have things you don't want to share with one person, you want to share with another. Well, that is definition of a secret, like what I don't want to share with
And I
someone.
remember where that conversation led to us sort of, we were big, we had bean bags. Remember, we were in the 70s, so we had bean
Yes, we
bags.
both got bean bags for Christmas. One Christmas, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Bean bag
And
thing.
somehow you went over and grabbed your bean bag from your side of the house, came over to my side of the house, and we started to put together things that sort of some kind of dark things that were going on in our house. Like, do you ever feel like mom and dad aren't happy? And I was like, oh yeah, I feel that way too. And and one of the things that came up, which was the moment I was sort of like, wow, like we got aligned, was, does mom ever talk about you behind your back? Right. Does mom ever talk about me behind my back? That was the question. Does mom ever talk about me behind my back? You asked me that.
I don't
And
recall that, but that's interesting that you remember
oh,
that.
that was the moment for me. And I was like, yeah, she does. And I said, because I was not very close with mom. And I was so starved in a way that you were so
Inundated,
over
inundated with
inundated.
attention. Yeah.
So
Micromanaged. Right.
micromanaged, and I was invisible.
Mhm.
That was the roles we played in our family. I was invisible and you were micromanaged. So for me to catch mom in a conversation was very unusual. Used to happen while she was playing solitaire at the kitchen table, usually really late at night. Every once in a while, I would wander downstairs, and because it was, 1 or 2 in the morning, and she would be playing solitaire. And I remember you saying, "Did she ever talk about me behind my back?" And I said, "Yeah." And I never thought about it as a good thing. I said, "Does she ever talk about?" And I said to you, "Did she ever talk about me behind my back?" And you were like, "Oh yeah." You don't remember this?
I don't remember this at all. I don't remember this
This
part
was
of
the
the
changing
conversation.
moment for me. And
That's kind of
it's just funny
crazy
how
that because I remember the part about maxi pads, but I don't remember this specific part. That's interesting. So this is new to
this
me,
is where the
folks.
con
I'm hearing it for the first time in, a long time.
yeah, and that was when I felt us say, I remember you saying, because you always had more language than I did, and it was like, it's almost like we're being pitted against each other.
Now, do
Do
I
you
do
remember that?
remember that? I do remember that because that
Okay.
was the feeling. That was definitely the feeling of that we were like, I remember one thing mom would say would be, okay, like I remember this is funny. This is like that's sparking these like memories. This like it's coming out. There was an episode of The Brady Bunch, okay?
Okay.
And in the episode of The Brady Bunch, there was like an episode about tattletales, like telling on your brother or whatever. And
I
it
remember that.
was like the thing was, Bobby, don't be a tattletale, like this is the mom and the dad talking to them about like telling on your brother or sister. And I remember mom sort of like we're watching this show at like in the middle of the afternoon or whatever, and mom turning us and saying like, I want you to be tattletales if your sister's doing something. And like, okay, I get this, if your sister's doing something dangerous, I
Yes.
want you to tell us. It's like, but we were kids and you weren't doing anything dangerous. It was just
I
more
was
like, yeah, you were like,
12 or 30, it was so innocent. And
right.
yeah, and it didn't, and it didn't come from a place that felt warm and fuzzy. This is why I say to
No,
people,
that's exactly right. Like if it was coming from like, I want to sit you guys down and say like, I wouldn't want you kids to rat each other out in a petty way to us over just because you have a grievance with each other and use us in that way. And like if we love you guys, and if either of you was in trouble and the other knew about it, please come to us. We're a family. We're going to fix this together.
yeah, that
Oh,
was not the
no, that was
energy.
not the conversation. That was, I mean, that
No, but
sounds like a really good conversation.
right. And let me just interrupt that. Like, we'll, pause that put a pin in that story for 1 second. That's where the idea that start when you look at a story or something you're saying and teaching people how to like know if it's their inner guidance, like speaking to them. Like if someone's giving you advice and it's coming from a place of love, you can feel it. And if it's coming from, I call it your inner critic because it's the inner critic. What's the inner critic again? You all know. It's like it's the conglomeration of all of these negative things that have ever happened, including this conversation, gets lumped into the negative voice that's now speaking to you as an adult. And her intention, no matter what she was saying, the words of like, you need to tell me about what your brother's doing if he's doing something wrong, or you need to tell me about your sister. The feeling that I had, and I think that what you're saying is, and when we sat down in those beanbag chairs and we said, is she talking like, what is mom's intention here? We started without even knowing the word intention. We made up our own young kid words for it. It was like, she doesn't necessarily like, do you feel and she doesn't have our best interests at heart in some
The
way?
word that comes to mind when I think about it is manipulation, because I feel like mom was like, I'm going to put this in contrast to like we have two amazing grandmothers and had
Absolutely.
years ago. And our dad's mom was just a very naturally warm and wise person. And she approached the world from a warm wisdom where and I think I'm closer to that now, where it's sort of like, in a sense, you're safe in this world because you're loved, because we love you, right? Like the adults in this family are watching over the kids. And there were, when we went over to her house, there were many adults, aunts and uncles and, all
Sure.
sorts of relatives. And we were the kids, so it's like, you could have three, four, five, six relatives all watching over you and just making sure you're safe. And that was not how I felt when I was at home with mom. It was like, there was nobody was trying to work things, like pull strings.
There was nobody was running. There was no alpha. There was nobody running the show.
No,
Like the
I mean,
sort of
like
like,
my grandmother was running the show, but from the perspective of, she was the matriarch of the family. Someone does the cooking, someone does the organizing. She was certainly that, but it wasn't coming from a place of like, I run things and people do what I say. Not at all.
no, never, never, never. But in our house, we sort of got we got the idea. For me, that was the conversation that made me start to say, wow, is there anybody in the world who would do something out, not knowing now, like now I know that like hurt people. My mom had, like down the road, there's this much more like we're not, if you know where mom came from, you would think she did really well with after what she came from. Like
Really
abject
difficult
abuse that
story will be told at some point, I'm sure.
down, yeah, down the road. This is a long road.
Long road,
but
long journey, yeah.
but she was in some ways pitting us against each other to keep us separated. And at that moment, we started to say, maybe because she was afraid of losing your love or like, losing, I don't know what her fear was,
I
why
don't know
she
what
kept
her
us
fear
apart
was
from each
either,
other.
but it was, just to say like simply fear-based in a way that um our grandma on our dad's side was love-based. Like you could tell that our grandmother just approached the world from the perspective of, I'm safe in this. I'm safe in this.
And that was the lens she looked at the world through.
Right.
And mom, the lens she looked at the world through was fearful. And fear meant controlling in this particular way where she's going to wrestle things to the ground. And part of what, we got caught up in that whirlwind of her wrestling things to the ground. And I remember that day was the beginning of a bond that never broke, that
Right.
we started talking about things that were, again, how many secrets can you have at 12 and 13 years old? And at the same time, very shortly thereafter, there were a lot of secrets
This is true.
that, like what, like how we were being treated, not to know. We started becoming aware. This is something I would go to friends' houses and say, something is not right at home.
I love one of the stories that you tell, and probably your story to tell, but I don't think it's is that I remember you talking about going over to your friend Connie's house, who, was a really, really close friend for you when you were, I want to say 8 years old, right? You were like seven,
Yeah,
8 years old, right? And you would tell the story of how when when kids came over to our house, like we were just kids and we would like make chaos in the room, right? Like pull out every toy and play with it and throw it all around or whatever. And then they would just, like their parents would come or they would just live close enough that they would just go home and they would just leave and like leave you with this sort of chaotic mess in your room and you wouldn't think twice of it. But like when you were over Connie's house, that at the end, her mom was there, give you a lot of space, let you play, pull all the dolls out, pull all the toys out. But then 20 minutes before it was going to be dinner time, she would come in and she'd say, okay, girls, like dinner's going to be in about 20 minutes. So let's have you put away all your toys. Do you need me to help? And she would, she'd help pick things up
absolutely.
and organize and whatever. And it's like that difference between sort of, you know, a mom who is in it, there is guidance, right? There is like the
Right. There's that
so
word.
we talking about our grandmother and talking about your friend Connie's mom, the guidance that kids receive that they can't generate themselves because they're too
And
little.
and I want to talk about that even more, but there because there's an interim story that like these are going to be stories that weave into stories, which I think is good. Um, Fast forward like to maybe a year after meeting Connie, and like that's when you first start doing a lot. For me, I met her when I was in second and third grade was when we were really close, and I spent a lot of time at her house and a lot of, I started having sleepovers way long before you did, even though I'm a little bit younger than you. It's just I was sort of out the door
It was
because
kind of a
it was
girly
very
thing near
painful.
the time. It was not necessarily, but it was, kind of girl thing, like girls.
And it's a girl, absolutely. Like nobody
I
was
had
buying,
kids over too, but eventually, but yeah.
right, but no, like that, like a big thing was getting your sleeping bag, getting a sleeping bag back in the day, it helped have a sleepover. So when that happened, I remember these are the kinds of things that started the question of something isn't right in the house. Like the something isn't right in the house is that I remember going to friends' houses and thinking there's sort of an order and a thing to this. And knowing that mom was off because one time we lived in the house, let's give some context here. Every house that we lived in got worse and worse as far as filthy dirty. It wasn't messy.
And
We're,
mess.
anybody can deal with messy. Like, I mean,
Well, it
I'm
was
a
messy.
very,
It was certainly messy, and it was
it
like,
was dirty.
yeah,
It was dirty, dirty, dirty. I mean, I remember this is going to be, yeah, I can give you a traumatic story from teenage years that you weren't there.
I
Do you
wasn't
want it?
there.
Can you handle it? Can
I
you
could
handle it?
probably handle it. But
Okay.
can
I
they?
don't know.
But can
Can
they?
they handle it?
Can they
Okay.
handle it? Well, we're
So
emotional, right?
the house was so dirty. It's happened. You were
How
off at
dirty
college.
was it?
Okay. That there were so many ants on the kitchen table.
Mm.
And I was terrified of bugs, and I still am. And that's why I'm very, very organized around my house now from trauma. Some things that can help you to do something you want to do. And I was scared of them so much so that I took a newspaper and put them on top of the ants and started going like this. And a week later, that piece of paper was still there.
Oh, that is traumatic.
Yeah,
That is.
when you have, so
I'm
fast
being
forward to
I'm
that.
being traumatized even as we speak.
Okay.
Okay, I'll have to
So
walk this
I
through. Right.
that was the progression of how you left for college a little earlier for
Mhm.
many reasons, and those things happened, and the house got messier and messier and dirtier. I mean, like the kind of dirt that no child should live in, even though we had money. So it's not about money or not having money. Mom was we had bouts of times where we had cleaning
Mhm.
people that would clean the house, but
And I
mom,
remember also,
oh,
I remember, so here's another one. Like, I remember us because we were in this period of collaborating, you and I went, to
Yes.
collaborating. And I remember like you and I saying, like, let's clean the whole house. Like, I don't know, we got, like,
Yes.
nobody's home, like, and it's just the two of us. And we're like, let's clean up the whole house. So we cleaned up, like the whole downstairs of the house. And I remember, and we cooked, I believe we cooked dinner as well. Okay. So that's
Yeah.
pretty, I'm not going to, we were like, I don't know, like 13, 14, 15, whatever we were. It's like, I'm not going to say it was, heroic on the level of Anne
It was
Frank.
probably Hamburger Helper.
Yeah. But like, like it was something. It was something. And
Hey, pretty
I
good.
remember at the end of it, like after all that, and they sat down and ate. And then I said to mom, like, hey, can you do the dishes? Like, because hey, we cleaned the whole house and we cooked dinner, which is like pretty cool for kids to, and she was like, I don't know that I will. I want you to see what it's like to
Well,
do
that's
all
going to
this
bring me
work
to
and
the
never be
story that
thanked
I
for it.
had.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
That story is spot on
So
because when I came home one time and mom struggled with, I mean, this level of mess. And she was cleaning out a closet while the whole house was a mess. And I was young enough. This is like, so we're going circular in time. I was young enough, like I would say I was about 9 or 10, 8, 9, 10. And I had been on my first sleepover and I came home and mom was cleaning out a closet and taking everything out. And I remember saying to her, Mom, like, you know, the how like things are really messy in the kitchen. Like why first question was sort of why are you taking things out of a closet? Because the only way to get things done is to clean out a closet. And I said, like I was like, okay. And innocently and stupidly, as you know, mom, I said to her, I've been thinking about this because I see, like, I mean, I was always sort of problem solving. And in my innocent way, I had said to her, isn't there like a way that if every time one of us in the family takes something out, if we just put it back, would the house stay clean?
this is a new theory, brand new theory.
This is my new, like, I mean, my 8-year old, 9-year old theory. It just seemed to me, because my room was a mess. The house was a mess. I mean, but I thought, what if we all, like here, be Tammy, always sort of like at that time, the optimist, I have an idea. Like, what if all commit to it? We'll all take something out, we'll put it back, and the whole house will be clean. And she was like, you have no idea what the real world is like and what it means to take care of a family. And I mean, she went off on a dissertation, and what those dissertations were like. You were sitting there like,
There were footnotes.
wow.
There
And
would
you
be
just can't,
footnotes.
you can't leave the room until she's done because then you're going to get in trouble. And but you don't want to, and it taught me, people say like, well, like I was like, and I walked away thinking, wow, I really missed something here. There must be something so much more to this. And, I had planned on going and cleaning my room. And and she was like, and you think you're so much smarter than everybody. You think you know how it's going to go. You just try to figure out how to. And I thought, I'm missing something here. And I got to learn like what I'm missing because you're listening to your mother. Like she has an aunt. Like I thought to myself, like I really offended her and I don't know what I did. And years later, I mean, and of course, the thing about fear and the inner critic and the way we speak to people is that there's some truth to that. Like, I don't know what it's like to run a house. Like, she's not that off.
Right.
It's like, but the simplistic idea of thinking things out and putting things back as an adult, I sort of adopted that idea many years later after a lot of therapy because I remember not wanting to be neat because I didn't want to hurt her feelings.
I
Like
get it.
it,
Yeah, I get it. And I guess like all of this as you're speaking it is sort of like we really, like we've done 4 podcasts, this is our fifth, and we're getting a little personal, and I think that's a good thing. It's like this is in a sense to show, the guidance gap,
the
like
guidance.
the
Yeah.
guidance gap that we were, like because okay, we're brother and sister, and we're both in fields where people hire us to help them, to whether it's like help teach my kid math or help my kids get through the SAT, or on my side, on your side, like why is my life not working, whatever. And I really do feel like we've both come down independently into, where does guidance come from? Like, how do you, like presented with an apparently chaotic world, how do you make sense of it? And at 8 years old or 9 years old, whatever you were, there you were trying to make sense of it, right?
Right.
And like, she was not a white tornado. She was another kind of tornado, right, in the house. But trying to like impose a little bit of order, like, well, what if we just did this? And
Right. And I walked away scratching my head and thinking, this is what where the idea that we can feel crazy even when we have a good idea. And the idea of be creating a belief system. My belief system started to be at that time, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I must not understand the world. It's not as simple as that. And it isn't as simple as that, but there is something to, if you take something out and you put it back, things will be more orderly than if you take them out and don't put them back. It's not, that wasn't it could have been handled. How could that guidance have been handled differently? It could have
I think that's
been,
a really good idea. Like, because even if she had been like coming from the place of like, oh, my kids, they don't clean up after themselves. And even if she'd been in a place like that, she could have been like, wow, teachable moment. Like, okay, honey, let's do that. Okay. Where do you think we should start? Because like when a kid comes to me with an idea, I mean, unless I think it's a crackpot idea, like it's like, or,
yeah.
I'm saying, I mean, like, kids, like I said, okay, let's eat ice cream for breakfast every morning. It's like, let's go out on the roof and, like, or let's not. Right. Okay. But, presented with an idea that, a younger person is generating, they're generating this idea. It's like, wow, let me support you in that. I mean, and for real, it's not just like, let's see you do this and, like see.
And what happened at that moment for me, I realized when I look back at those seminal moments, the moments that say, you can't trust yourself, Tammy.
Yes.
Like that the world works in a way that your idea, as childish as was to, if we all get together, if we, as a family, we take something out and we keep each other accountable for putting things away. And I have an adult, most important figure in one's life are their parents. It's just the way it is. And she was teaching me very directly, you're crazy. You can't, like, your instincts are off. You can't, that's not the way the world works. And she could have said to me, like, wow, like that can work, Tammy, but we've got a lot of, like sometimes we're rushing out the door. There anything, but while I walked away from that conversation, I started that conversation more whole and left more broken.
Right.
It was and I look at it as we sort of have a mirror that we see ourselves in. And that was like,
A
it
crack in
wasn't
the
the first
mirror,
crack
right?
in the
That's like,
mirror.
oh, this is my face. Oh. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, I had to go, you know, down very, very, very far through a lot of things that kept cracking the mirror even more and more and more. And, my life is about being putting that mirror back together, Humpty Dumpty, putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. And you can come back from this, although it took the arc of many, many years for me to understand there are moments where you make a decision as a kid, I can't trust myself. And and the opposite side of the equation was when you and I had that first talk was the moment of somebody understands me. We
Yeah.
sat there probably for 5, 6 hours that
Oh,
day
easy,
in those beanbag chairs
easy.
and
Yeah.
just,
There's a big up till late at night. It's funny. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something else to say before I?
no, no, no.
No?
But just the idea that though, there are moments that life is a series of moments, you know, and the healing moment that we had started, ironically, opening up, looking at the cracks in the larger family.
That's a yeah.
And both of those things are helpful, but
Well, let's
difficult.
put it this way. I think like so. I know that I really was lost for a certain number of years there. I was, especially when I was, let's say, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was really quite lost. Um, and then, began to do some healing. And then we had, we had what we had, in terms of creating a community of two where there was
Yes.
like, honesty and authenticity and realness and safety and whatever. By that,
And we felt that. That was a feeling. Like that's what I'm saying. Like for people, you the feeling that we had, no, we couldn't have described it in those words, which are perfect words. And yet you feel it. Something feels on or off. And the conversation I had with mom felt off, even though I couldn't explain that it felt off. So
yeah.
continue, but that
So what I was
on
gonna,
or off.
and what I was gonna say, I guess it like so. I want to go in this direction just because I want to be a little
Okay,
forthcoming about my own self. And
sure.
so because I'm reminded, like, I really was quite unhappy when I was like 8, 9 years old. And then when I was like 9 going on 10, I like sixth grade. So let's see, sixth grade. No, that would have been 10 going on 11 for me. Okay. So um I completely I had a basically a meltdown in sixth grade to the point where I essentially stopped going to school. I was, getting sick all the time, accident prone, and eventually I started asking my mom and dad if I could do home instruction. So they at first said no. I was seeing a therapist at the time, and the therapist said, I don't think it's a good idea. So they were like, no. And then eventually my pediatrician basically weighed in and said, like, I'm looking at him and I'm saying like he needs a break. So okay. Um, so literally the really worst time of my life was this, culminated with this 2 or 3 month period of doing home instruction, which began with mom sort of having this kind of like, oh, I'm going to teach you all this stuff and you're going to learn. I was like, I didn't learn anything. I didn't do, it was like, she had a stack of books that I was going to do and I was a smart kid.
Oh my God.
But oh
I'm
my
feeling
God,
sorry
like,
for you.
like, well, if you just like, you just look, it's like, here is, yes, a smart kid who is having a meltdown. Like, he just needs like normal stuff. So then it's funny, when I was late, many years later, I was in therapy and I said, so what happened was the school eventually sent a teacher to do home instruction, to guide the home
I
instruction.
remember that.
And the guy, and this is like, again, coming back to the theme of guidance. And I said, oh, and the teacher's name was Mrs. Plateau. And my therapist burst out laughing and said, oh my God, how perfect. And I'm like, that one just like zipped by me. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, it's perfect. Like, Mark, don't you see? It's like, it's a plateau. Like you're walking up this mountain and there's no break, and then you're at a plateau. And I'm like, oh my God, that is perfect.
I have
So
a question for you because it
yeah,
goes back to
sure.
the origins of where I think your problem started. And it was this story has moved me every time you've told it.
Uh-huh.
It breaks my heart. Like, um, you were sort of the lauded child, like the brilliant child, the smart child, and you were in kindergarten. And I remember you telling me, because I was too young, I would never remember this, that mom skipped you from kindergarten to second grade and you begged her not to do that.
I'll tell you
So
what.
I'm,
I'll tell you what. Like, here's what I remember about that. It's like, I remember, so this is how goofy this get. And again, like, I'll be able to talk about this now because like many, many years of like, this is a long
oh,
time,
correct.
so like feeling, but like now to look at it from the perspective of an adult, it's like, here's how not to raise a child. Like, here's how you might not, like don't let this happen, right? Like counterexample, right? So I remember when I was in, now this is like nursery school, okay? Like I was in nursery school and she moved me to pre-kindergarten. She
Oh,
said,
I didn't know that.
right, okay, now like that's like, my child is too smart for nursery school. Like, what child is too smart for nursery school? Like, you're like, what are you doing? You're finger painting and, you know, napping and having cookies with juice and you're like, like and you're 3 years old, right? Like, no, he's
Right.
going to go to Harvard in a year earlier. So, okay, put him forward into pre-kindergarten. And then, evidently, like I think I just cried all day. I think I remember that actually, like crying.
Yeah, it's
Whatever. So they put me back. Okay. Cut to next year. I'm in pre-kindergarten. She puts me forward to kindergarten. Okay.
really
Really, I mean, I'm not, like I'm
okay. I love this.
remember
Go
this
ahead.
stuff, but it's weird because you don't think about it for years. And then evidently, like I don't remember this part, but I remember that she would say, like, well, you said you missed your friends, and so we had to put you back. Like this is a fail, it's a big failure on your part. You're 4 years old. You're
You're already a
beyond this now.
failure.
You're four, right? You're like, I miss my friends. So the school says we should put him back into pre-kindergarten with his friends. And then kindergarten was normal. Kindergarten was I just did kindergarten. And then, I remember being in my first day of first grade, sort of being pulled out and taken and put into a second grade class on the first day. And it was like, okay, like you don't have really a lot of say in your life at that point. And it was like,
None.
okay, I'm like being pulled out of first grade. I'm in second grade. And before I was even settled into a first grade class, like, so, I like whatever, and that took. But like in my, I would just like to put out there that it's like, I don't think it's a good idea to push kids forward before, like to, especially coming from like an ego place of like, my child is so smart that he will do, beyond like, that kind of stuff.
Well, the thing about it is like this is where the life coach in me kicks in because there's some kid out there that is going to be like, please send me to second grade. Like, and
Yes.
they're going to thrive in that situation. There is like these kind of things. It's very hard about right and wrong. It was right for you or wrong for you. You knew in every fiber of your being. I mean, I remember you saying, I begged to go back to first grade. All my friends were in first grade. I wanted to be like, and you were, smaller. You were a smaller kid anyway,
Yeah, right.
right?
And
So
then you're like real
you,
small because you're a year behind everybody, right?
right, right. And so it another kid might be the biggest kid in the class and really smart and really saying you were really smart, that's the reason they moved you ahead with no question.
Right.
But another kid, it's not about what happens, it's about the intention and the
Absolutely.
connection. If a kid is going to a parent and saying like I feel, like I just this can I try this, mom? Like I would really love. There's just what we're
Right.
talking about here is that there is a lack of connection in our family that we came across going back
Right.
to our story of like when you wandered across to my side of the house and we sat down and started talking about things that were real. And if a kid goes to his mother and says like they've got to get good relationship, and they're like, like I know I'm a little kid, but I really I've been like this I want to go to second grade, and they're having an instinct about something. I mean, like a kid who says I want to learn cello or or start
Which
the
is where like
piano at
just
a young
simply
age.
keeping
That
your
wasn't
finger
where
on
you
the
were at. You were not
right.
happy, and
I
you
think your
were
finger on the pulse of where your kid is a good like I
bingo, Ringo.
as a like you mentioned like I had a student his name is Matt, really, really good student. But I remember like I want to say he was like a going into freshman year of high school. And I had noticed that he was, I worked with his older sister and like he would come along sometimes as like the 3 years younger kid and just be like really quiet and really into it. And so I worked with him for about a year and I put out there at the beginning, he's really smart and he's really good in math, but he is a year behind the curve. Like right now, the math that he's learning is he's on track so that he won't get to calculus in high school. And he's the kind of kid who could really do it. So I just mentioned, and his parents were like, at the time, his parents were like, we don't want to push him because he's like a little bit shy. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. I get that. He was very, very quiet. And so, like, we don't want to just, okay, so no problem. But then what happened was at the end of that year, he kind of like everybody got kind of talking about that fact. He enrolled himself in summer school so that
Yeah.
he could
Wow.
do, it was basically summer school, like 6 weeks of math that was going to cover a whole year of algebra. So he, in 6 weeks, jumped over a whole year of algebra and had to take the placement test, like had to take the state test. So it was
Yeah.
like really hard. And then it wasn't even a done deal. Like after he took the 6 weeks, it wasn't even a done deal. He had to pass the test. He did pass the test. So he jumped over that year in 6 weeks into the next math. And that, but it was like very inspiring to see him take
It's
that
also
on.
look at the underpinnings of that family. Probably this is the thing, these are the things that, coaching talks about a lot is, it's not about exactly what we do. It's about being on the pulse of where you are in your relationship to yourself. It's like being on the pulse of your relationship with your children. It's knowing that this is the problem in some ways with this is good and this is bad. No, this is good for you or bad for you. Why going back to, practical, you know, well, philosophical, this is a bad thing. It's like, well, philosophically, it's like, this is a bad thing for Mark Zagarelli to be doing this to skip first grade. And because that what I saw was in jettison to, sixth grade, and you needed to take time out.
Oh, I did take that. So in other words, it all balances out after
And that is the law
time.
of balance. That is,
Right.
again, we go back, people are like, why do you talk about, universal laws? I'm like, because you can't skip things in life. You can go, I believe you can do internal work that move you through the universe through what I call a wormhole in the universe. I call it through a miracle, like a miraculous way of like, wow, that I did all this internal work, and and it sort of moved me to a different place a quantum leap that I couldn't have gotten to unless I had done that internal work. But if you're slogging through like what we were as children, like sort of like, you know, a, a very mom was mentally ill, undiagnosed
Yeah.
and diagnosed, and medicated and unmedicated. They just, again, the world before Oprah, before people were really talking about their feelings and nobody was checking on the kids in the house. And we definitely looked like kids who something was wrong if people had been noticing. Like, I remember family members later saying, wow, I always knew, but I didn't know what to do. So
Right.
that's why I say,
And you can't, right. It's really tough because if you're being like, you could be a loving adult in a family, and if you're being blocked by the parents themselves, it's like they have, maybe there's other cultures where people live together and it's like, you can, the grandmother, you go to the grandmother and say, like, can you talk to the daughter or whatever? But like in a nuclear family, it's basically the mom and
and we were
dad.
isolated on purpose. Like that's where the conversation, like let's loop back to the conversation that we had where I said, is mom talking, we're mom's talking about you behind your back and me behind my back. And to what end? Not that I'm not saying that she was cognizant of doing this and that she had a negative intent. She was coming from fear. Keeping my children separated is going to keep me in the power seat. We sort of thought she sort of held fort at the kitchen table. She was very not functional and she sort of sat there all the time. And I remember walking in the house and being like, oh my God, let me get past the kitchen table before she says, Tammy, you know, I'm like, oh God, many days I would walk past and she's playing solitaire because our mother didn't work, she didn't have to, and she was very depressed all the time, sleeping most of the time. We have a lot of stories, which we'll get into. And it's again, these are not tragic stories. These are upsetting, but we've done a lot of work on this. So but the
They're
point is
formative
that
stories. Let's say they're formative stories.
they're formative stories that gave, that led to, because people have, getting back to sort of just updating, why we're here, like how did we get in guidance? I become a life coach, and you become an education coach, wouldn't it make sense as someone who had struggled with early learning like you and who's as smart as you are would want to give kids a great experience in school, right?
Right,
And
absolutely.
I,
Yeah.
and I, when people say like, what's your greatest credential for being a life coach? And I say to them on the first session, it's like, you can go to any school you want to be a life coach, but basically like your life creates you as a life coach. Like if you are starting to really work on your own problems, like I sometimes say in the first session with people, this is going to be a safe space because there's probably nothing you've done that I haven't done worse. I really have like a history of, where, like I said, you've sort of taken in some ways taken a more traditional higher path, sort of, you made it through those things, like you made it through high school, you got into the college, you kind of, through the grace of God, or, the all that is, wound up in a
Kids have gone in
great,
5.5 years.
yeah,
Right?
that's sort of normal
It's a
these
five
days
and a
in
half year
college.
plan. But hey, 5.5 years seems like a long time when you're in college. And
Also,
then
you wound up in
college,
a
it doesn't.
college that you wound up in a dorm that was sort of a creative dorm
Oh,
at,
yeah.
at Rutgers. It was with all the creative people, and that
Yeah.
really was where you started to fit in. And the trajectory of our lives, if you knew us when we were, 5 and 6, you might have said, Tammy's going to go, um, the more I was
Traditional.
outgoing, I was
Yeah.
friendly, I was always out with friends. I seemed like I was going to go through sort of a that kind of path. And that didn't, my life took a left turn probably at fifth grade. Again, like I talk about the decisions we make, the things that we do. Why do I harp on how to learn how to make great decisions? We go back to inner guidance, like building your inner guidance. My inner guidance had been challenged so many times in growing up. Like, I must be wrong about this. Stop trusting myself. I must be like, the world seems more simple to me. I must be off. I kept getting, like I said,
When you
like,
said that,
mm,
that was another thing that you said that I wanted to point out is like is I think there was a point at which I said you pointed to yourself and said, "Oh, I must be wrong here." There was a point,
absolutely.
there was a point at which I decided, and it was pretty early. It was pretty young. Like these people are nuts. And I think that there's something to be said for,
That's healthier. That's healthier. I
well, if
believe
they,
that's
the thing is,
absolutely,
here's the
for
thing.
you at that
If they
moment, it
are
was healthier.
nuts, like it's like
They are right,
if you have your
right.
finger on the actual pulse, like if you're paranoid and you're like, these people are out to get me and everybody's really, really trying to just, then okay, that's another like, so like the direction of where the finger points, if it hopefully points at something closer to reality. But you said like, mom said that thing about the, cleaning or whatever, and you're like, oh, I must be off here. And
That was what I said, and true to form. There's a time in life when something is off, and you point it on the thing that's off. Mom was actually doing these emotionally abusive things. She was doing them. I do not believe she was trying to hurt us.
no, she was
Her own mental illness created a situation where she was hurting us. Like, she's thinking, I'm helping my son to skip first grade so that he can have this great future. But mostly what she was saying was to prove that I have had a genius child.
right.
And you are a
That's
genius.
pure ego. That's pure
Pure,
ego.
pure ego,
Pure
pure
ego.
inner critic. Like,
Right.
I need to inner critic, ego, interchangeable words. I need to have the smartest child in the world to prove that I am the smartest mother in the world, and I made all these right choices.
So
And
I've got
he's
this is
going to be like, we're going to put him on a,
I
Here's
got
the
a great
smartest child
story.
in the world,
I
right?
got a
And I got
great,
one after that too.
so this is a, like, right after I did, so I mentioned having done the work of landmark education, which I think is terrific. Right after doing either probably the forum, the advanced course, whatever, I was in a place where a lot of times, if you're being coached in a group, like like 100 people and everybody's working on stuff, and so it's a place where people are taking risks and they're, listening to stuff like someone saying, like, can you try on that you're looking at this wrong? And or no, not wrong, but like try on that there is another way to look at this that might enable you to have access to power that you
In
didn't.
my language, you're fighting for your
You're
limitations.
fighting for your limitations, right? Exactly. So I was used to that. I was used to that of, like, someone would say something inadvertently, and then the leader would pick up on it and say, like, when you say that, this is what I'm thinking, and is that true? And they're like, no, 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 that's not. And it's like, no, let's really, really, let's look at that. And then they would push on it a little bit, and it like they would yield something usually. So the thing I was going to say was, when we were kids, mom always said, I'm going to live to be 108 years old. Now, she didn't, but that was
No,
her.
she died young.
Yeah, she died rather young, right? So that was her um more than dream intention. It was like, I decided when I was a child that I would live to be 108 years old. And that was just a
Mm.
little fragment of information that I didn't know that there was anything there, but there was. So one day I was talking with mom. This is after the forum, and we were like really talking. We were actually trying to talk about real stuff because it was
Mm.
like it's a very
Interesting.
fruitful time for our relationship. Because I had forgiven her a bunch of stuff. I was like, I'd been holding stuff against her for years, and it was like, I need to let this stuff go. I'm like, whatever. And so, like, I'm not holding this against you anymore. Let's just move forward with this, whatever we move forward to. So she said it was like almost like a disembodied thing. It was like, a person could make a decision at 8 years old that affects the rest of their life. Like, it was that. Like, there was pretty much words like that, very disembodied. Like, and I just said, Mom, what decision did you make at 8 years old? And she said, No, no, I was just talking. It was just like an analogy. It was just like, and I said, Mom, what decision did you make when you were 8 years old? And she said again, like, but it's not really, it's nothing. And I'm like, I asked her again, and I just like stayed with it. I'm just like, talk to me. What was it? What did you? And I didn't know that there was anything there. It was like, there's like a little, like a little trail of breadcrumbs, and I'm following it. And she says, okay, when I was 8 years old, okay, now it gets interesting, right? Um,
Hmm.
Mom was adopted. Okay, she was adopted, and she
Yeah.
felt very out of place, and
Yeah.
there for the moment.
And she was adopted into a family that
Kind of crazy family, right? Right, and
that
abuse.
eventually didn't really want her
Right, that's right, because they had a child of their own, and then they, okay, so
after adopting her, they had
after,
a child of her own. So it
right.
was
So this is like a really hard, sad place to be. And now she's
right.
8 years
And
old,
they told her. I mean, it
and they
was like
told, right,
she was adopted into a family that couldn't get pregnant.
correct,
My grandmother couldn't get pregnant, tried and tried and tried, adopted my mother, and then immediately got pregnant,
was able to get pregnant, right, which
was
is
able to get pregnant, which has been known to be
documented.
true.
That is a thing. That is
And then my grandmother was very verbal that you are no longer necessary. So this is where her, we'll start to feel the pain,
right.
generational
That's it. Like,
pain.
where does this come from? Well, it doesn't come from nowhere. And while
Yeah.
we're on the topic, I will say that her mother endured abuse at a level that
Oh my God.
I
Grandma.
don't even want to contemplate. So that,
Right.
so that whatever we endured, our mother endured more, and whatever our mother,
And let's just be realistic. Let me just, you know, grandmother, our grandmother on my mother's side endured unfathomable physical abuse, every kind of abuse. My mother endured, you know, like I remember her telling me she was beaten with the heel of a shoe. I remember she was, she showed me her leg and my mother had scissor marks down her leg. Did you notice that? Did you
yes,
ever know that?
absolutely, absolutely. I will never,
And
that's not
from
something
from
you can forget, right?
but I'm saying so when mom, let's give her
Mhm.
some credit here.
Sure.
So, she said to herself, if I ever have children, I will never touch them. I will never
And
hit them.
she
And
did
she never
not.
did.
And she did
She
not.
did not.
That's right.
It was a very emotionally abusive place to grow up,
Mhm.
but she never touched us. And
That's
so
right.
like, so, and, you know, and so
Right. So the cycle
history
continues.
keeps repeating. The
So
cycle continued even with me.
this to
You
give
know, like,
context, this to give context to that story. So at 8 years old, that's where she was. And she said she saw a movie. I want to say the actress was potentially Margaret O'Brien, which I've never seen a Margaret O'Brien movie. We're going back
no,
to
I
the
wouldn't.
40s, the early 40s. Okay, so but she said she saw a movie about a little girl who was a genius. And because of that, she was surrounded by loving and admiring adults who just thought
Oh,
she was the most amazing thing ever. And so she saw this movie and she said, so when I asked her, what decision did you make at 8 years old? She said, I saw this movie and I decided I was going to be a genius.
and she was.
And I was also going to live for another 100 years. And that's why she always said she would live to be 108 years old. So it like puts
Wow.
all these pieces together for me. But that the main thing that I got from that, like because having done like the some of the work that I've done is you can make a decision at 8 years old from this perspective that makes perfectly logical sense to an 8 year
To an
old.
8-year-old.
And then if you're still living into that at 20, 30, 40, 50, that's a crackpot decision. That is, or let's just say that that is a decision whose shelf life has come and gone. And that would be,
Right. And also like, let's just, like this is a perfect moment to say this, is that, you know, life coaching and education coaching, coaching of all types, therapy. She needed therapy, which again comes before life coaching or during life coaching. If you don't interrupt that pattern, and there's a story I want to tell after this, and remember fifth grade. I don't want to. I want to tell this after because it the stories we tell ourselves at 8 years old, unchecked by you got into doing the forum, which you had therapy before that, you got into the forum. People say, why work on yourself? Because if you don't, working on yourself does not mean that you have to have a therapist, does not mean you can be working on yourself by reading self-help books. You can be working on yourself by, watching Oprah religiously every day, by, listening to a podcast, by whatever
I think
method. It
simply
doesn't
setting
have to,
the intention, simply setting the
setting the
intention
intention that
will
I'm
allow something
going
to come
to,
in. Right.
right, allowing new information to come in, which is what we're trying to do here. But these stories are trying to set up the idea that what happens is that as kids, to save ourselves, we make decisions. Like mom made a decision. The way I'm going to be safe in this world is if I'm super, super smart. And her IQ was off the charts.
She was a very
I mean, it
bright,
was
very, very bright, but
right. And so,
it became her kryptonite. Her superpower became her kryptonite.
which is everybody's.
Well, there it
Everybody's
is.
superpower, it
There it
can be
is.
their kryptonite,
Right. Right.
and at the same time, we were maybe this podcast, like what's the idea of this podcast is the idea that we can make these tragic decisions and someone else can make an amazing decision. Like life is not always about tragedy. Someone can make a decision at 8 years old. I just saw this amazing golf game, tennis game, basketball game, and I'm gonna, I saw someone sing on stage. I saw someone, I saw Pink, and I saw her flying through the air, and make a decision that serves them very well for the rest of their lives. Not every decision we make as a child is a bad one or a good one. It's just we have to suss that out with what are the results from that decision. The results from the decision that at 8 years old that she was going to be the smartest person in the room for the rest of her life, and that was going to bring her love. Because what are kids looking for? What
Love,
is everybody looking for? Love
love,
and connection.
safety, love and connection. Right.
Love and safety and connection. That's it. That's what we are here to do. Connection, love, safety, all this stuff.
Mhm.
And that was what she thought you, and so you were her firstborn, right? And her mom's reason for having a child, so she said, I want to have a child, one child, on the extra, heir and a spare,
They
right?
own spare,
Like
right?
heir and a spare, I'm spare. So I was an accident, oops. Now I want to show you how generationally things go. She made the decision once she said, I want a child because I want someone in this world who's related to me. I want to know someone who's actually related to me. So she had you. And so she was going to pass on to you the gift of being so smart, which you already had, but she was going to make sure of that. And everyone is going to, she was following a path of an 8-year old
Right,
unchecked. And
right,
so skipped for, first grade. That which played out to down the road is that this created all kinds of problems for you, created all kinds of problems for her, created all because an 8-year old decision, even if you say, I want to be the greatest singer,
hmm,
well, a parent could say, let's nurture that,
right,
right?
right. Well, I would
And
say I would say the most important thing here is I think that kids make all sorts of decisions, and that I think it's very important to honor the volition that, like kids don't have a lot of power in the world, right? But,
right,
a very small little person has the power to decide something, right? And those decisions often look like they're certainly usually they're skewed, all right, because kids don't see the world, they don't know all the pieces, right?
right,
So often those decisions take the form of nobody really cares about me. Um, the world's not safe. The world's not fair. Like love is just a lie. People will always leave you, right? Now, those are decisions that are obviously like skewed and negative, and they would have to be dealt with in their own way. But positive decisions too, like for example, let's say that an 8-year-old sees a TV show like that, or and says like, I'm going to be a singer, right? But let's say that this child is really nurtured at like 11 or 12, that kid they may be really struggling to sing, and they may like say to like, Mom, I just know that you just will be so disappointed if I don't do this. And then the mom has to untie that knot and say, like, honey, do you think that this is about me not loving you? And like, if that knot gets untied, in other words, like a little kid makes the decision,
right.
like, I will,
Is the job of a parent to reframe,
right, to reframe. That's exactly
to
right.
reframe, like you know, you being a singer is not what makes me love you.
Right. I
What
love you.
makes
And
you,
now, do you want to also sing? Because if you also love singing, now that you
but
get to
also you
sing,
may have found many other things in the past few years you like even more.
right.
You
Or
like,
maybe I like singing, but I don't want to sing in this competition because it's too much stress. Or it may be, wow, now that I know that if I fail, I still am loved in this family, it takes the pressure off so I can sing better. Like there's all sorts of outcomes that can happen.
right. It's it spreads out. It's the idea that bringing it back. Why do I always talk about, team love and team fear? Like, where are we coming from when we're talking to somebody? Not what are we saying? You could be saying, like, what's the funny thing from some movie? Like, let's have a nice family, Thanksgiving dinner. It's like, you can say something and not have the right feeling behind it. That like sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner and saying, like, we're thankful for that it's everybody here is like, and that many people dread the holidays because, oh, you know what Thanksgiving's
It's
going to
not
be
going to be
like.
that.
It's not going to be that. So for a parent to be, a lot of times I'm going to go over the same things, five things to say to your kids when you don't know what to say, to reframe, to create. We have to be, go through a little bit of discomfort as a parent to say, this is seeming, noticing my kid, and they said they want to be a singer. They said that when they were 8. Do we reboot the computer for them and say, well, you're on the track team now and you seem to like that even better. Is it okay, mom, that I like that better? Like, I thought I was going to disappoint you. It's like, no, like five things to say to your kids when you don't know what to say. I love you. I believe in you. I'm on your side. We're in this together. How can I help? We're going to go over those things, but tactics, like what is bringing back around? What are we going to talk about here? We're going to talk about philosophies. We're going to talk about um, miraculous things that can come out of just changing our language. There are practical things to do. It's like watching your kid make a decision and then saying, there's a new way to make a decision. How does this feel? Does it feel slightly better if you're making this decision? Does it feel slightly worse? Does it feel really good to get up on stage anymore? And like, I don't know, mom. Okay, I don't know land. Go to I don't know land. I'm like, so what's I don't know land, mom? It's like you don't have to have every answer right now. It's okay. Like so because kids are making lifelong without a parent checking in on their relationship to themselves and trusting themselves. When we are talking about where we were spinning out of control because nobody was at the helm. Nobody was driving the bus in our family. Nobody was driving the bus.
Right. That goes
So if
back to
nobody's
guidance
driving the
gap, a
bus,
gap in
guess who's
guidance.
driving the bus if nobody's driving the bus?
The kids.
Fear is driving the bus.
Oh, okay, there you go. There you go. Yeah, right.
Because loving parents are driving the bus. And
Kids can't
loving
drive the
parents
bus.
can,
Kids can't drive the bus.
but
Right.
also a loving parent can admit, I'm wrong here. A kid walks up and says, you know, says, well, if you take things out and put things back, is like, could that work? And a parent might say, yeah, you're kind of right about that, Tammy. Yeah, like I'm struggling with keeping the house clean. And maybe that's too adult for you to understand right now. But like parents can reframe.
Mhm.
Like not to if mom had said to me, Tammy, like I know you're right. It's that simplistic. Take something out, put it back. But there's a lot going on in this family. Reframe. You're not crazy. Great idea. But yet it's bigger than that. Duality. If a parent can explain duality to a kid,
Well, also,
this is the gold.
it seems to me that like if you're like kids are always growing, and a lot of times we need to update the mental map. Like, you've got if you've got your 9-year-old coming to you and saying like, "Mom, maybe we could try this." It's like it's possible that a mom is just sort of like, well, like you guys are kids, and I'm supposed to be cleaning, and that's what we do. And then the kid is coming to you saying like, like I'm old enough now. I'd kind of be into helping, and that could be a really good moment for a family where it's like, okay, I'm not gonna like send you down to the basement and tell you to like, like clean up the basement, but it's like, do you want to help me straighten up the table for dinner? Do you want to help me set the table? Like, that's normal family stuff.
Right. And so we're talking about when we start this, the road from unhappiness to happiness is it becomes a journey of we were spinning around as children. And I'm going to talk about like one more like really like moment for me, that I was spinning off in the air. And what does when we say like you got to start working on yourself, what does that mean? It's the moment you give into intention. Like, and I have things called Tammyisms. Tammyism number 3, I think, is you can't be irrelevant. Like you are having an effect on your children, whether you're knowing it or not. You're having an effect on the people around you, whether you know it or not. I thought I was an invisible person as a kid. And yet I was still having an effect on this family, no matter how invisible I made myself. And just to give a little more context with mom's mom was, my mother was adopted. My grandmother adopted a baby from a woman, blah, blah, blah. There was keep giving away children, keep giving away children. And then out of how does this stuff keep repeating itself is because no intervention happens. Not the kind of intervention you're sitting down talking at a family. That stuff doesn't work. Or it does, or it doesn't. I'm saying I'm talking about just getting intentional. Mom, without even thinking about it, had me, and within a few weeks of having me, gave me away for a few years,
To your
or
to our grandmother
to the mother, to her mother,
who
and I didn't
adopted
come back
her.
until who adopted her. So I spent the first few years of my life out of the house. So just nothing changes until somebody gets intentional. And whatever reason I came back was, I think dad was like, this is insane, get her,
And absolutely went back and said, "This is insane. This is it." Yeah, that was
right.
like where, like, I believe my understanding was like the pretense or pretext was mom was sick after after being pregnant with you. I'm sure that there was some postpartum depression in there. There was also, I believe,
Which nobody knew about back then.
right, and that wasn't a thing. It was a thing. It just wasn't a thing that was diagnosed or talked about. There was also, I think there was also like some kind of a kidney um
Yes, terrible
failure
kidney
or
infection,
disease or a kidney infection. That's right. But
massive kidney infection.
I think, and it was
So, so
serious.
something that was supposed to be a few weeks became a few months, became almost,
A
you
year,
know,
right.
a year, but we wonder what, but there was no intervening in now when we see people are more watchful and mindful of their kids, and that's a good thing because we're making life altering decisions as kids that can be good, bad, or ugly. And some of the ones that we make are change the course of our life. And a parent just getting intentional and saying, you know, wait a minute, like, when I say 5 things to say to your kids when you don't know what to say, I've had, a father who was, you know, having a daughter he was so worried about. And in the long run, didn't even have to. She was amazing. But, you know, I'm so afraid that something terrible is going to happen to her, and this and that and the other thing. And we say, like, if someone had said to mom, here's 5 things to say to your kids if you don't know what to say. Start every sentence for the next 2 weeks with, I love you, I believe in you, I'm on your side, you're in this together, how can I help? The difference is between many years ago with mom and now is that we talk about things. Mom would have looked at someone like this and said,
This
you're
is
crazy.
ridiculous, right? This
This
is
is ridiculous. What is this going to do?
right.
And I remember a story where, I read my first self-help book. I was
Oh,
working at a restaurant. This story is so funny.
what would you remember what book it was?
The Road Less Traveled.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. That's a
It
good one.
was 1989. And I was reading my first self-help book. And I remember, like, this is the difference between then and now. And like, that's why this podcast is happening now. But we're giving a little, you know, background so that people will know where we come from and why we're doing this. I remember waitressing, and back then there were no cell phones. There was in between shifts, I was like, reading the book and reading the book, and I finally finished The Road Less Traveled. It was a M. Scott Peck, the original version of it's been kind of bastardized. He had rewritten it, and certain people have rewritten it.
Interesting.
But the original version was absolutely brilliant. I know you love it.
I do. Yeah.
And I I remember reading in the pages of it, sort of like, your problems are sort of, the good news is the problems are all your fault. The bad news is the problems are all your fault. But the idea of it was that was the moment I was like, if my problems are my fault, it means I can solve my own problems. I
They're
was
not
like,
there. They're not right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I have some control
Hmm.
because my life has been about feeling out of control. Whereas you made the decision, they're crazy. I
Right.
made the decision, I'm crazy.
Right.
For many, many reasons, I made the decision I'm crazy. And I must be doing something wrong, constantly looking for where the bad thing inside of me was. That's the road I took. And you took a different road. What was your road more like? Like, some people out there are bad, some people out there are good,
So
but
what I would say to that is like that there's downsides to both. Like the
I know.
downside to like, okay, so I guys are allowed to be angry in a way
Hmm.
that girls aren't. I'm talking about kids. I mean, hey, adults too. Men are allowed to be angry in ways
Yeah.
that women are not allowed to be. Or that there are more consequences for that behavior, right? Whereas, generally speaking, women are. If a woman bursts into tears in a restaurant, that might be like, oh, poor thing. And if a guy bursts into tears in a restaurant, it's like, dude, like, so there are male and female, but like, so I took the road of um my anger is going to protect me.
You were the angry young man.
I
I
was
when I heard the,
very,
when I
yeah.
heard the Billy Joel song, Angry
Yeah.
Young Man, I was like, Mark,
Oh, I know you. I know you.
I know you. I met you.
And I was. I mean, I like one of my favorite is like shout out to Allison. I hope Allison gets a chance to watch this because like we've been friends all these years, but when we were sharing an apartment off campus for a summer, and I was so angry that I would have like rages and I would break bottles and stuff. I would go out on the back porch. I would be nice enough to go out on the back porch and break a bottle. But okay, like that's a problem, right? And that was the summer right before I started my therapy in earnest. So, kind of not a minute too late. But Allison would like she would come to me like with this kind of like she's real dry, real dry. She's cool. And she'd be like, "Hey Mark, I had a bottle of wine last night and finished it. So if you need something to smash later, if you're feeling like you need to, here's a bottle for you." You know? So
Right.
thank you for being supportive of my really insane angry behavior. And I don't think I'm quite that angry anymore these days.
Right. But in some ways that's like for me, the looking down the pit of like what's wrong with me. Like not like I remember feeling absolutely crazy for so many years. Like I remember having like very unusual conversations with mom. We had a sporadic relationship, that become, when I got sort of, my journey into adulthood started very young. Like I said, I I'm going to tell the fifth grade story because it's the beginning of the end of my innocence. The end of innocence for me happened in fifth grade. And down the road, I remember I told on an earlier podcast that I sort of was born with this connection to something greater than myself. This I had a very strong inner guidance, sort of a very strong moral compass that to me seemed so secure. And I remember mom and I having a conversation, and you watch these TV shows and someone tells a lie. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And mom said, well, you better learn how to lie because you're not going to like this in this world, you know, you're not going to make it through unless you listen. And I was like,
That's a
everything
great lesson
inside of
for a
me,
child. That's just
it
a
was, but
terrific
it
lesson.
was, mom was diarrhea of the mouth. And what if, she
If it
felt
happened in here, it happened out here, right? Like
right. There
zero
was
filters,
no
zero
filter.
filters, zero filters.
Zero filters. And so I remember thinking, every fiber of my being tells me that truth is the basis of life itself. And here I have the most important person in my life saying, you better get good at doing this. And I also had an incident when I was a child when I innocently told a lie. And you remember when I was probably 3 years old and I crossed the street on Madison Avenue and mom was like, you're a liar. You'll never be anything but a liar.
Wow.
It
Like
was the most
great.
traumatic thing I'd ever, like the first traumatic thing I ever remember was like her saying, that's who you are. You're a liar. You'll never be anything but a liar. And
Wow.
then years later, I was always wrestling with that, thinking like, am I a liar? Like, I don't think I'm a liar. Like, I didn't, and now I know, like, being a mother myself, like, kids just go through a phase. If you're screaming at a kid, like, this is my thing, like, you're screaming at a kid of, like, did you have a cookie before dinner? And they're like, and they have their hand in the cookie jar, and they're like, no, like, and they're like,
So
were like, you were, wasn't me, and you're like, as a parent, one a great way to handle this would be like, well, like, did you want a cookie before dinner? Not me. Mm-mm. No, I would want a cookie before. And
hand in or
fully,
crumbs on crumbs stuck to mouth
yeah,
with a milk mustache, right? Yeah. Like, but
And
kids don't know. Kids don't know that they're
right, my mom asked me, I was 3 years old, I know because we were living on Madison Avenue, and she, I had, I was left very much to my own devices. We were not watched. Kids weren't watched the way they are with, you know, helicopter parents these days, or any good parent, not just helicopter parents, but we were sort of freely left. You know, I remember there were times like this is the kind of, I can laugh about this kind of neglect now, and it's because I made my peace with mom, and we have down the road an amazing story to tell you about mom. I do anyway. But I remember there were times in my life when people would just pick me up from walking around the neighborhood as a 2 year old and open the front door of the house. Do you remember this?
I do not.
And they would just put me in the the door of the house and close the door. And I would like, I would leave the house regularly, and I would, neighbors would sort of open the door and put me in the front door
Hmm.
because where was mom?
Probably sleeping.
My,
Yeah.
my mother said with, because right, we
Sleeping
learned to make
hides her
mom
away.
tea to get mom out of bed. We had to make her a cup of tea in the morning,
Right.
which, and I
Like
remember having to
seven.
push a
At like
chair
seven.
over to the stove
Yeah.
because the stove was up here. So you know, I'd make mom a cup of tea. Mom would not get out of bed without a cup of tea. Dad left at 6 a.m. So it was like, for, you know, he worked very hard. And we know, like, there was, we both knew how to make a cup of tea before anybody should know how to make a cup of tea. So for me, when I have mom screaming at me and saying, "Did you cross the street?" And I was like, "Wasn't me. You know, I didn't cross the street." Now, for me, kids, if you're screaming at a kid, they're going to eventually lie, and that's a great opportunity to say, you know, it looked like, you know, like your pan's in the cookie jar,
Right.
but how to handle it as a sane parent might to be saying, you know,
Well, like
it's okay, like,
this is a moment when I assure you I love you, you're safe, and honey, please don't lie to us. That's not good
there's
either.
no need to lie to us, like what you want to make
We're
a child
safe.
feel
We're safe.
like,
Right.
and also you may like, you may not be having your, you may need a cookie because, you know, dinner, I'm late on cooking dinner tonight. Well, like, you're like, to help a kid to understand, like,
Like,
you know, maybe they're not all wrong.
right.
Like you don't have to lie to me. I
If
see your
you're
hand in the
hungry,
jar.
you could ask me. And right, like, right, there's a whole lot of ways, like tarring someone as a liar for the rest of their natural born days is not the preferred method of handling
Right, but the
the first juvenile
juxtaposition,
lie. Right.
right, you are a liar. And that I wrestled with from like 3 years old on, because more morality was just the theme for me in my life. You know, okay, I'm a liar.
Do you
And
want me to
then
tell the fifth grade story?
yes, the fifth grade story. Because let me just finish up this. So
Sure.
my thing with lying was when I heard mom say you got to learn how to lie in life. I mean, my brain almost broke because, again, another cracked thing. It's, I'm a liar and that's bad, but you should learn how to lie because you're gonna, like, you need to be able to put on an air in life that people will respect. Okay.
Right.
So the the thing about kids is they're gonna make all these decisions, and we're not going to catch them all. You're lucky if you catch your kid with the hand in the cookie jar, because you can address lying and saying, like, this is a safe household. I'm with, like, you're going to try on lying, you're going to try on a lot of other things, and like, maybe we don't have to do that because you're, I'm not going to get mad at you for whoever you are. I love you anyway.
You know, what's interesting as you say that, I'm again going back to our grandmother because I remember once I this is kind of a funny thing to remember, but I remember there was like I asked her, there was like these words that you would hear on TV, the words generation gap, which was a, you know, like a thing, you know, like the words that were used. And I was like, what does that mean? And I remember she said, well, that means that when people are of different ages, like you and I are of different ages, that there might be a gap, a break in understanding, a lack of communication.
Wow, she was brilliant.
But then the next thing she said is, but we don't really have that. And she was right. I never lied to her. There was never any need to lie. There was never any
Absolutely.
doubt that, like she would sometimes, I was a handful. I mean, I was like, I remember I asked her, I was like, she,
I remember this. I
right. She
remember
would
this
always
story.
say, she would always say,
I remember this
like
one.
she would reprimand me in a way that was, like, Mark, you need to learn to be respectful to adults. If she had to say, if I was short with an adult or, whatever, if I was, took a toy away from you or whatever, she would, like, it wasn't like it was dangerous. It was like, well,
Oh, she was so
this is
sweet.
not you like essentially this is not who you are. This is not who like I know you're better than this. That was the sense that I would get from her. And she would always say, like, I say these things to you because I love you. And in 100 years, when I'm gone, you will remember these things. And it's like, well, it's been not quite 100 years, but we're coming up on that, right? Like it's
But I
enough.
also remember the funny things she said when you were like, you questioned her about like,
Oh, I did
well, you don't,
absolutely. Right. She was like, she at one point, like after, she, like reprimanded me again. Like reprimanded is too strong a word. Corrected is even maybe too strong a word.
yeah, she was
Right. It's
so
just
much
sort of like,
fun.
Mark, you need to be respectful in this way. I'm asking you to do that. Okay. And, she said, Mark, I say these things because, nobody's perfect. You're not perfect. And so I say these things to you. And I said, and this is exactly the kind of thing that I would say. I said, oh, if nobody's perfect, what's wrong with her? Pointing to you, pointing to, what's wrong with Tammy? And it's like, if everybody has faults, what's wrong with her? And she laughed. I mean, she genuinely laughed because she's like, you kind of got me. There's, like, I can't think of anything that's wrong with you. So
And
she
the
sort
thing
of
is
carried
that
her
the
under the
reason
bus.
that happened that way is because I learned at a very young age when after that talk that like I said that stern talking to by mom, like you're a liar. I learned very quickly to keep, you were the mouth that roared in our family. You came out, you were coming back at people, and I was
I
like
was.
amazed at that.
I
You
was.
were, and I knew like zip it. Just like my entire intention as a child was I was going to become invisible.
Mhm.
Like I am not going to cause any problems. I'm going to be absolutely invisible. And then I'm going to get like the fifth grade story. This is just, again, was invisibility at its worst and how these decisions that we make. I mean, like this is rather a macabre podcast, but maybe it's the beginning to
Well, it's forthcoming. I
understand.
think we're being vulnerable, transparent. I don't know, pick your word.
Yeah, I mean, it
Like,
is what it is.
I certainly like,
And
I guess before you say your thing, what I would say is I would like not to come off as a person who is sitting on a pedestal, dispensing great little bits of wisdom for people to lap up. I The fact that I have hurt in life, made
yeah,
really bad mistakes, like little tiny
me
ones,
too.
great big ones, like, and everything in between. Like, I think that that's how I hope it's made me a better teacher and just person. Because
So,
God knows the successes in life don't make you a better person. They make you happy. They may make you happier, but it is the
yeah,
failures that make you a better person if you
yeah.
survive them.
And that's what we know why I talk about like, you know, you know, happiness is the booby prize. Knowing how to be happy is the prize.
Right.
Like,
Happiness is like winning the lottery. Like if it's like winning the lottery and you can't reproduce it, it's not worth very much. Whereas,
right,
getting knocked down and getting back up again builds resilience.
it
Making a
does.
mistake and correcting it and saying, I'm really genuinely sorry to the people that you're genuinely sorry to and not making that
True.
mistake again. That's like it makes you a better person. I mean, so like, but
Right. And I think this is about the generation gap. Like I think that why this particular podcast is important is because what mom and dad went through was their mom's side of the family had generational abuse going on down the line, straight down the line. Dad's family sort of had this like happy family that was the people, all the generations living, either
They were very
people caring for the
sane. They were
kids.
very for a household where, I think to myself, like, well, if we were staying there, then there were two adults, our grandparents, and two kids. But then there was a spare room where there could be as many as another, Aunt Flora and Uncle Mario could be there. That could be another two people, another two adults. And then Aunt Lee, we have another who like could be sleeping on the couch while we're sleeping in the fold out. So that means like five adults and two kids, and then Sunday dinner and
In a
more
two-bedroom
people.
apartment,
In
in a
a
two-bedroom
two-bedroom
apartment
apartment
that was
with
so
one
joyful.
bathroom. Right. And like at a tiny little kitchen where insane amounts of food got made. It's like so much so that
Right.
if she made pasta, she was like laying the pasta on towels on the bed, because
Yeah, she made
like
homemade
literally
pasta
no
that
room
way.
anyplace else to, so but like a really functional household considering not a lot of money. God, there's no space.
But I
One
think the
bathroom.
gap came, I think the gap came where I see this, like the generational gap came from both of our grandparents. One family, mom's family much more abusive, and and dad's family sort of, you know, people helping people.
Functional.
And then we kind of wound up with the way that life moved on, and life became this insular family of, like, you know, nobody lived together. People didn't, and we were sort of the first generation of that in our family, where grandparents weren't helping kids. Like, we were all isolated, and a lot of it happened because of mom's mental illness. That she isolated us from everybody, and in isolation, things like that's why things breed in the darkness. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
so. A lot of decisions that were made, like, why did I seem like the I was a good girl when I was younger? It was because wasn't because I was trying to be a good girl. It was because I was terrified of being seen in our household. Where you could come back at mom,
So
and
you were
mom and
compensating. You were
overcompensating for,
where
like,
I
if
was
I'm if
not.
I'm
I was
invisible.
right. Like I'm going to root this thing out by like, and of course, I didn't have the power as a kid to do that. I could yell and scream, but it wasn't like it was a powerful place to be coming from.
Right. And now, looking and saying, what are we doing here? It's like all of, all of the language, all of the idea of connection, being the discomfort of being positive when it's not always easy to be positive. And I'm not talking about, think positive thoughts, although those are great, but, intentionally watching if your kids are they being good kids because they're trying not to make waves, or are they genuinely being good kids because they've got a lot of great things going on, and there's the way to be. But for me, like, the story of fifth grade was that, you know that was where, for me, I think in sixth grade you got a plateau, Mrs. Plateau. You got a timeout
Yeah.
where you said everything started, because the focus was on you. You took a breather, had some what they would call homeschooling now, and mom was bad at that, so the school actually sent someone to that gave you a break from school. And for me, I wanted I always was struggling with the idea. By the time I was in fourth grade, I was very, very, very good at being invisible. And I was feeling safer because mom wasn't attacking so much. But I was not really, I thought to myself, is this really the way to be? Is this like, is being invisible really what I've become? Do I have, like, and so I started to want attention. And in doing that, I thought, I've tried getting it. I started doing things that would be like getting great grades, and no attention. Like, you get a great grade and it's on the refrigerator, and I get a great grade. It's like, So I did a great job at becoming invisible, but that was I was struggling with like, this is where I always come up with inner guidance, inner critic. I was struggling with, yeah, like I the way that I see the world in my inner guidance is that the world is a good place, it's a loving place, but I'm not experiencing that. So what I want as a kid is attention. Your kids want attention. If they can't get it from doing things well, what's the other option for a kid?
There you
Start
go.
doing things wrong.
Right.
Mark's getting attention for doing things wrong, and
Oh, yeah, and
he's getting help.
I was. Right, correct.
And you were getting help.
I was.
Like that when I was in fifth grade, you were in seventh grade by then. So I watched you go through that sixth grade thing.
Right.
And I thought, well, it worked for Mark. Like I'm you're wrestling as a kid with what am I gonna, how do I get attention? But I made this incredible fatal mistake. Not fatal, fatal to my soul at the time. What's the not word that's not fatal? Damaging. I don't know. You know, where I
You made a
sort
wrong
of
turn. You made a wrong turn, I would say.
I made a very severe left turn into the darkness. And you can come out of the darkness. I have in many ways, but that left turn was so clear. So I was going to in fifth grade, I thought, came out of fourth grade, did really, I always did well in school because I was trying to be the good girl. And then I started doing well in school to try to get attention. Like, oh, like I'm really gonna try. So in fifth grade, I said, like, I'm, really gonna, I'm gonna shine this year. So first marking period, four marking periods, right? In school. I go to school straight A's, bring home the report card. I'm like, we're going somewhere now. We are going somewhere now. I was rocking it. I was like, straight A's. In parents back then had to sign the report card. I don't know if they still do anymore. Um, and it was like, I don't like mom. I think mom said, like, get your father to sign it. And I was like, where's the accolades? When Mark gets straight A's because you were, you struck brilliant, but struggling sometimes. It was like, oh my God. And I'm waiting for the fanfare. And I'm like, where did fanfare go? What's going on here? So fifth grade, you're 10 years old. And in my mind, I was a completely an adult. Now I look back at a 10-year-old and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. So I come back after Christmas break and we have a new teacher. And she is the young, like the maternity leave for the first teacher. New teacher going to be there for the rest of the year. And I know she had told us it was her first, she was like maybe 22 years old, first job out of college. And she was really gorgeous. And all the guys were like, oh, this is great. Like fifth grade, I guess you're starting to awaken that part of yourself.
Mhm.
And but 10 years old, I still look back and say, 10 years old. Hmm. In my mind, I was at least 25. There are memories of me being 25. I was 25. And I remember thinking to myself, first week back of school, doing my homework, and the new teacher had a very different energy. I guess she hadn't practiced being a teacher yet. And she said, okay, everybody, I'll call your name, bring your homework up to the desk. And I was like, okay, so and so, check, you know, so and so, check, check, check. And then I bring up my homework, my last name is Zegarelli, right? So I'm last. So I'm watching everybody go up there. And in between, there was one or two people that didn't do their homework. And she said, okay, you get a zero for the day, a zero for the homework assignment. And I was like, that was it, a zero? I worked really hard on my homework last night. So I hand my homework in. Oh, good, Tammy, check. Next day I did my homework and it's like, oh, zero for the day for that person, zero for the assignment. And I'm thinking, I'm working really hard here and not getting much attention for doing the right thing. Like, that's zero. I mean, I could have been playing last night. I just started making up things in my head of like, sort of like, why am I trying so hard? So this is me thinking of myself as an adult. And now I look at a 10-year-old on TV, and this is why it's so jarring to me. And one night I said, not doing my homework tonight. So that's all you get is zero. So it started me thinking, if I can't get attention from being good, maybe I can get attention from being bad. I don't know how to be a bad girl, but I've been told I'm a bad girl from a lot of different places, and I'm starting to feel that ick down inside of myself. So I go and I, Tammy, your homework, and I was like, don't have it. It's like, well, you get a zero. Okay. Next day, no homework. So get a zero. Now I'm expecting, I'm like, okay, it's coming. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm like, I'm gonna do what Mark does. I'm gonna get in trouble. And people are gonna pay attention to me because I'm gonna get in trouble. So I'm waiting and I'm thinking it's in like a week or so, and I'm like, they gotta call home. And like I'm ready. I'm like, I'm gonna take it on. I'm gonna be that bad girl, and I'm gonna have that fight and see what it's like to feel the attention. I was like, it was a noble experiment, and no phone call home, no. So I'm sort of like doing my homework some days 'cause I get scared, and I'm not doing my homework some days, and but I'm waiting for the teacher to call me to the front of the room, say after class. The whole semester goes by, and I am 90% of the time not doing anything. So my report card comes back with C's and D's on it. And I'm like, oh, here's the moment. I'm going to get in trouble. And I bring the report card home, and mom's like, have dad sign it. And I'm like, no, 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 look at, I did really bad, you know? And she was like, well, of course you did, you know, and that was the first time I heard, well, you better start to, depending on your looks, you're not that smart.
Ooh, that's a terrible thing to hear or say. That's a
And
terrible,
I
terrible
was
thing
like,
to say.
but I was like, okay, and dad looked at it and was like, like that's not like you, Tammy. Like whatever. And so first marking period did well. Second marking period, C's and D's. Scared to death. Third marking period, straight A's again. Nothing again. No reaction. No great job, great job, great job. Fourth marking period, C's and D's.
What difference does
And
it?
I,
What
what
difference?
difference does it make?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, not knowing, I get moved on to sixth grade. If you take A's and D's, put them together, C average, right? So I move on to sixth grade. And over the summer, I shake myself straight and say, oh my gosh, I have to get myself together. I cannot, like, it doesn't work either way. So I'm going to make it right. So I go into sixth grade thinking I'm going to do great. Like, I'm going to clean this up. But all of a sudden, I didn't realize that fifth grade is a seminal year for what you learned: math, English. So now I go into sixth grade and I'm struggling to get C's,
Wow.
but I get them. C's, D's, C's, D's, C's, D's, but not because I'm not trying, but because fifth grade math is essential. So I squeak out of sixth grade,
But now you're behind.
and seventh grade, I
Hmm.
remember like 6 weeks into seventh grade saying to myself, I can't fix this. I really am stupid.
Wow.
I really am, not knowing, like, I can't pull myself out of this hole I've gotten into. And
And
I
that was
remember in
the,
seventh grade, this is the end of the story. I remember in seventh grade figuring out, I guess I was 12, 13. What do you are, like in seventh grade?
yeah, 12, 13, right.
13 going on 14, probably.
No,
13.
I think 12 going on 13. Yeah, I think that's right.
Right. So I'm scraped by, and by the end of when I remember when I was turning 14, I circled the calendar. I can drop out of school when I'm 16.
Wow.
And that moment, I was like, I am stupid. I'm never gonna I'm never gonna get anywhere. C's and D's is who I am.
Ooh, that's terrible.
And
And of course,
and
there's the moment where you just wish that you could
anything.
go to your parents, you could go to someone and say, "Help, I'm drowning,
But but
behind."
my parents were like, mom and dad were like, yeah, we were expecting this from you. Like,
Hmm.
and so I never even made it to graduate. I mean, I dropped out of school. I dropped out of school, but like I guess as I was turning 16, and the rest is history, which is down the road. But those why why become a coach? Because I know now when I see a 10-year-old, I cannot reconcile. I thought I was an adult making a choice that people were going to notice, and it didn't go that way for me. And there were so many negative and repercussions from that left turn into darkness
And it
that
feels
took
like when you
years.
say it, it feels like a very small choice.
So small, like I'm going to make them notice me. I'm not going to be invisible anymore. And what I became was even more invisible. And not knowing that, not learning what I didn't learn affected me for years and years and years. And of course, there's it's this is a sad story, but it's a story that took me on a self-help journey eventually,
Right. Yeah.
after many other things that went wrong,
Right.
and put me on a path that maybe if all those things didn't happen, I wouldn't be so concerned as I am today
Yeah.
about helping people
Of
to
course.
not make those kind of mistakes. And there is hope, and there are ways of coming back into the light. I mean, I'm a person who believes that you can come back from anything if you're trying and working on yourself. And this podcast is about, so unhappiness, from unhappiness to happiness, that those steps, first steps back, again, I relate it back to us to the idea of when when people say how to become a millionaire, start with $1 million and parlay that $1 million into $10 million. And for me, this podcast is about how do you make the first $1 million? Unhappiness, that level of unhappiness, to if you're already a sort of happy person, building on your happiness, we want you to do that.
And I think
Of course.
the thing when you say that, like it's like the way that unhappiness, depression occurs,
Yeah.
because I think I'm not sure whether I said this on a previous podcast, but there's like three, evidently depression shows up as three things. One is I'm terrible. The second is the world is terrible. And the third is the future is going to be awful, going to be a disaster. And so it doesn't, if the world is occurring to you in that way, like I'm a terrible person, the world is a terrible place, and the future is a mess, a disaster, you're not
Right.
thinking of it as maybe I'm depressed.
Right.
You're thinking of it as, yeah, and it says I'm terrible, the world's terrible, and the future is all screwed up. Like it would be a natural response to say, yeah, I'm depressed. Of course I'm depressed. If you're not paying attention, if you're not depressed, you're not paying attention. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. I was in that, like the way you describe it, where it's like your life, like I like circling the bowl, so to speak. My life is circling the bowl,
Everybody loves that saying.
and I'm
Yeah.
like a little laughing about it now because I think you have to inject some humor into it. But it's like the way that it occurred to me at the time is this is a terrible place. The world is a terrible place, rather than it became evident after a certain number of years of therapy of like, oh, like I have something to do with this. I wasn't taught these things. I wasn't
And
guided.
it didn't occur to me that the world was a terrible place.
Uh-huh.
What occurred to me was I am a terrible person.
You deserve this.
I deserve this. I
Okay.
did this to myself. If I
Okay.
hadn't, and I always, I mean, it wasn't that I pinpointed fifth grade. I thought if I hadn't lied to mom at 3 years old, and if I hadn't been, if I hadn't, done those things as a child, the world, the world is a beautiful place, and I don't deserve to be in it.
Hmm.
That's what occurred to me. So on the in as I went through many things that, rock bottom, that wasn't rock bottom. Rock bottom was still yet to come for me. And
Ah.
and
But
and
that was
and
like a step towards, that was like the beginning of the
that
climb.
was
Yeah.
that was the seminal moment of that one childish decision, you know, and the road back from it is is the rest of this is, is
And
the rest of the
it's what
story.
we call redemption.
Yes, and that is going to be for many podcasts to come, including all the different things that we're going to talk about. The only reason I bring it up on this podcast is because I'm no longer attached to that story as who I am and what I mean. That story is relevant only because you and I grew up in, I love, I'm not sure if it's Deepak Chopra or who's he's Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate, yes.
I
Amazing.
love him. And someone asked him, two siblings growing up in the same household, and he said, no two siblings grow up in the same household.
Yes.
He
Yes.
said they don't grow up in the same household.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
And and even though in some ways taking personal responsibility is a great part of becoming a healthy human being, taking too much responsibility, and for you, ironically, like putting some responsibility out there was actually healthier for you in certain ways, and then learning how to take other, personal response. We've had different opposite paths
To the same
that have
place.
all roads
To a
lead to the
similar
same,
place. Well, I won't say
uh,
the same place, but
to
like
to the place of
to the
growth.
place where
Like
we
that's,
can have a 2 hour conversation like this. And one of the things, I guess, like I said this earlier too, in an earlier conversation this week, I was thinking about something that Joan Armatrading, like awesome singer-songwriter, and great artist. Like, and one of the things I remember that she said is someone said, like, oh, where do you find your art? Do you dig down into your, deepest soul, whatever? And she's like, I really can't write songs about stuff that I haven't worked through. I'm not that brave. Some artists can just, you know, Joni Mitchell maybe, is kind of like pours,
oh,
it's down into her heart and pours it all out for everybody. She's like, I'm just not that brave. I work it through, and then when I'm ready to talk about it and sing about it and write about it, then I do. I'm paraphrasing her in that, I'm hoping I'm remembering correctly. But her art is incredible. I mean, her songs are amazing and they certainly are moving, but she's just not ready. And I feel the same way. Like as
it's
much,
germane to what we're talking about. Like the thing is
yeah,
like that we are the things that we're talking about, at least in this moment, are things that we have spent many hours on a therapist couch working on. And
right.
I
And
didn't
in
become a
seminars and
therapist.
reading books and talking to friends and arguing with friends, having big, like, hairy dramas that had to sort themselves out as they did. And it's like, it's all led to this place where I can go like, yeah, I mean, like I say, the way that I put it is, and I probably put it this way in one of the podcasts, it's sort of like practically coming out of the womb. And it's like, like, little child, do you see the beautiful light over there? Do you see the warmth? Do you see the vision? Do you see that everything loving is over there? Child, now go that way. Go that way.
Right.
Start walking. And you're like, okay. And I'm walking that way, like, it's getting colder, it's getting darker. That bright sun is beginning to fade. Like, keep going, keep going. I'm like, what am I going to get when I get that way? Like, there must be something down there. And then it's a certain age, like, oh, I get it. These people don't know what they're talking about. Now I got to turn around and I got a lot of time to make up. And that
And
was all
that's
my
what
life.
and that's so important because why why I'm a life coach. It's because I believe with every fiber of my being that you do not have to learn everything yourself. You can learn from other people's experience. You can learn to recognize a child that's losing hope. You can learn to recognize when you watch an inspirational person to say, I'm walking in a direction I don't want to be going in. So it doesn't mean like, let me tell you, rock bottom is available for everybody, but it's not,
It's a place to
it doesn't,
stand. Right.
but it's
It's
not,
a place to
it
stand.
doesn't have to be that way for everybody. And let's face it, you know, the arc of my life, I have less years to live than I ever have than than I do behind me. So the thing is, I want people to understand, like if someone had said to me, here's how to make a great decision, and we're gonna, you know, does something resonate with you? The new words that are I love, people put down the internet and like, oh, it, but to be hearing, you know, scientists talk about resonating and being in vibrational alignment, your thoughts and your feelings lining up and having these incredible new conversations, science being not just Newtonian science, but quantum mechanics and all of this, so much of the idea that when I was going in fifth grade, the law of attraction was working for me just the way, you think about negative things, you're attracting negative things, not because you're not working the law of attraction, right? But because the law of attraction is just a law. It's so you get that way, like we have new language, we can create new language, we can create more hope, or telling our stories just to say, you know, if we can come back from this, and there are people that have much worse than we've had. These are just our run of the mill stories, and yes, there was pain in them, but there's also joyous stories and great things that have happened, and we're not, every podcast isn't going to be about that, but to not share anything about where we come from just wouldn't make any sense.
I
It,
agree.
it took
I feel like,
5 podcasts,
yeah, we really did have to be, like I said, vulnerable and forthcoming. I hope it comes off that way. I think it does. I certainly don't.
well,
I don't feel like it's coming off. I'm hoping it's not coming off like, oh, these poor people. Like,
oh,
like,
absolutely
yeah, like Don't
not.
Cry for Me, Argentina, because there was a lot of good times and there was a lot of, we certainly received more than our share of certain things,
Everything,
a lot of things,
everything.
a lot of things.
Yeah, there
Right.
was the thing is now, if without, let me just take away from this podcast so people can walk away with hope. My mother was one of the smartest women I've ever met. And she could debate you until you couldn't speak anymore. So I was quiet for many, many, many years until I could, I would argue with her and give her my opinions, and she would slice me down. And then I had to come up with, if I couldn't explain, be articulate with her, until one day I kept learning new language and refining my message. My message was always love is the answer. That was always the message. When I connected back to myself and the stories of being able to trust myself, there was one day when she was like, hmm. So she taught me how to fight and to express and to articulate why live a loving life, a life that comes from love. And that's a story for another time. But without her incredibly vicious at times language and debate, I wouldn't have become as articulate as I am and be able to explain the things that I can explain through lots of metaphors, lots of shortcuts, lots of, jargon and things that you'll hear in this podcast that we've talked
Yeah.
about before. I am grateful to her. And so I think on that note, on a positive note,
Right.
why don't we just leave it here for now?
Yeah,
Would that be
the last thing I wanted to say as you were saying that is one thing I know about her is that I feel that her whole life she was begging for a reason to care, a reason to trust, a reason to hope.
and that is a story for another podcast down the line. My mother had the most miraculous, magical, amazing last 2 years of her life that no one could have predicted, that will bring joy to your hearts. And we'll leave it there. But this is a woman who spent her entire life wanting to believe in love, wanting to have faith, and feeling that she was left out of that. But that was part one of her life. She went beyond, dot, dot, dot.
Works for me.
So
I absolutely agree because we were both there.
we were both there.
Yes.
And thank you for your honesty today, because it's
You too,
always
right back at
beautiful.
you, right back at you. It's um odd to talk about so much so deeply in the past. And that's going to give you a lot to think about, actually.
It will. This was something new we tried, and we're gonna, build on sharing more. And, you know, I feel complete, as Esther
Oh,
Hicks would say,
yes, I agree. I feel complete as well. And there will be more. There will be more. Yes.
because we are going to go beyond.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. See you next week. And anybody who's watching, comment, like, and subscribe would mean a lot to us, because we hope to continue this.
Please do. And we'll see you next time.